Welcome to Football Podcast Take 2 with Brandon White
and Robert Thackrey.
Here to discuss the offseason of the NFC East, a division near and dear to the heart of one Rob Thackrey.
It's not true. I don't like that. That hurts me.
He doesn't like the NFC East.
I don't like that.
True Philadelphia sports fan, he loves and hates his city and team.
I'm wearing just about the same amount of Eagles stuff that I normally wear.
Which is at least 50%.
And it's like rejecting me right now because you said that.
It's like a bad transplant, like you. You're a bad transplant.
Doesn't like me.
You're not from Philadelphia. You're not from anywhere.
I'm not even a person. So if you guys are listening to this and wanting to project forward as far as like when your team is going to be on this, we're doing this in playoff seeding order. So we did the AFC last episode, the AFC East last episode with the Patriots being the number 1 seed. We're going to do the NFC East this episode with the Dallas Cowboys being the number 1 seed. We're going to do the AFC West next episode with them being the number 2 seed, and then so on and so forth. Essentially, Falcons will be after that, and then Steelers, and then blah, 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 fucking blah.
For the most part, it works out.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Chiefs episode, specifically.
That's rude. That's rude.
So without further ado,
I am Rob Thackrey, and this is an inclusive podcast.
That's rude. I was gonna just count it as the fact that like it's hard for me to talk about the Cowboys without like my body rejecting me.
I was preparing myself to talk about the Cowboys. More so the Redskins.
The Cowboys were the 1 seed in the NFC. They had a 13-3 record. That's how they ended. They had 7 home wins and 1 home loss. 6 away wins and 2 losses. They ended up getting that first round bye, obviously because that's how the playoffs work, and then losing to the Packers 34-31 in what happened to be, before the Super Bowl, probably the best game in the playoffs in my opinion. It was a fantastic game to watch, with both sides going back and forth really, really interestingly. I think we talked about this obviously on last season in our playoff push, but both of them came back and forth, and even though, in my opinion, I thought by virtue of the teams that they played, the Cowboys had a slightly inflated record.
Who is their 1 home loss to? Remind me.
The Giants.
Go figure.
The Giants, they have some sort of, it's weird, like, you know how rock, paper, scissors works, and I'm sure this works the same way.
Yeah, I saw Cowboys and Aliens.
It's similar in the AFC West, isn't it? But each team has some sort of weird kryptonite to the other team, and it like cancels each other out. Like the Giants beat the Cowboys, and the Redskins beat the Eagles, and the Eagles beat the Giants, and the Cowboys beat the Redskins. It's really weird. Like it goes in some sort of really weird, like multi-directional, like fucking thing.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
Like the recycle.
This is why teams don't tend to repeat in your division, isn't it?
The last team that repeated in our division was us fucking forever ago.
Like
so
04, 05 or something?
I want to say, yeah, that's what I want to say. But yeah, that game was fantastic, but unfortunately they weren't able to progress because of a late field goal. So sucks to be them.
We're definitely going to have to take a long breath before we discuss the free agency departures for the Cowboys. Something that's definitely going to lead to them almost certainly having a weaker final record at the end of the season, I think.
If we want to like talk about that specifically, we could get into that. They had big ones. Tony Romo ended up retiring as a quarterback. That was something that was going to be seen. We actually talked a lot about Tony Romo as far as where he could go,
right.
Other team wise.
And then I think Adam Schefter reported that he retired due to injury. He fell off the bench.
That was rude. He's going to be a CBS commentator now, working specifically with golf because he has a really weird golf fetish. He's actually trying out for the U.S. Open, which is going to be...
He's been doing that for years, actually.
I think he's good enough to make it this year, though, which is weird.
He's decent as far as Mexican.
And he's got more than enough. He's got more than enough time to focus on his swing. Now that his back is broken, like fucking Batman.
I mean, he's been swinging on and off the IR for a few years now, so...
They re-signed, Ronald Leary ended up leaving to go with the Broncos. He ended up replacing Lyle Collins.
Boo, no. Lyle Collins is gone, but boo.
No, Lyle Collins stayed. Leary left. He went with the Broncos.
It's Lyle Collins, anyways.
It's Lyle Collins?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. He ended up replacing one of the people who went on IR as far as their offensive line went, ended up shoring it up a little bit. So he's part of the reason why Zeke had such a great season. So we'll see how that ends up going. I don't really think that their
line... like a top 3 O-line, arguably.
Yeah, I don't think that their offensive line specifically is going to diminish anytime soon. When they have to start re-signing people like Zach Martin, that's when it's going to get a little bit iffy, because they're going to have to let somebody go, if not a couple people. Their whole secondary basically left.
Turned the whole thing over.
J.J. Wilcox ended up signing with the Buccaneers, who just went on some kind of free agent spending frenzy. Barry Church ended up signing with the Jaguars because he doesn't like winning. Same thing with Morris Claiborne. We talked about him on the AFC East episode. He signed with the Jets because money over winning, I guess. And then Brandon Carr, who ended up up and down. Same thing with Morris Claiborne, up and down, but both of them ended up having pretty good seasons last year. Signed with the Ravens, and then Terrell McClain, who's the defensive tackle, ended up signing a pretty big contract with the Redskins. But yeah, their whole secondary.
Wait, you're not done with the McClains yet.
Oh, Rolando McClain. I listed Rolando McClain because he hasn't been re-signed. He's still technically a free agent, but he hasn't been re-signed, and he, despite his up and down performance, not this year, but the year before, when they lost their middle linebacker, who I am blanking on, but he ended up being really important to them. So, I mean, even though he had a down season last year, I still think he's fairly important.
Do you know how pissed off I was when Rolando McClain went to the Cowboys and played well? I was very unhappy.
And then Mark Sanchez went to the Bears because eventually, you have to pass through good teams to get to bad teams. So,
the Bears are kind of the team where people go to die right now.
You think so?
Yeah, it felt like we were the team, and then the Cardinals were kind of that team for a minute, except for they succeeded with all these dying men, and the Jaguars.
I still think he has one last stop. Cleveland.
You think?
I think he's got to go to
Cleveland.
Cleveland.
Sanchez will go to Cleveland?
He's making the rounds, man.
I mean, maybe.
He's making the rounds. He'll go to the Bills.
He's like AFC, NFC, AFC.
Either it's going to be like the Bills or something along those lines. He has one more stop.
His triumphant return to the AFC East.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he could go to the Patriots and back up Jimmy Garoppolo.
Only notable arrival that they signed in free agency was Nolan Carroll, cast off of both the Eagles and the Seahawks.
Tell me how you feel about him.
Nolan Carroll?
Yeah.
Decent. Not anything he's not a number one. He's a decent number two, but I don't. If anything's in front of him, he's good. But he gets. But
when
burned.
there's miles of field behind him,
he can get burned fairly easy. He needs over the top help, and we've already seen what receivers can do to him in this division. Dez burned him consistently when he was on the Eagles. Granted, it was a different scheme that they were running, but he didn't do all that well. And he did okay with the Seahawks last year. So he's, like I said, middle of the pack. He's a good number two. But with the amount of turnover they've had, I expect Nolan Carroll to struggle. Just not by virtue of the fact that he's a bad player, but by virtue of the fact that he's got nobody else there. He's learning a new system. Same with everybody else.
Well, let's talk about the man who survives all systems and makes your life miserable, who was re-signed by the Cowboys this offseason.
Yeah, dude, 2021. Fuck me, right?
Anybody who's familiar with the NFC East, especially Cowboys fans, you know who we're talking about.
Do you want me to say it?
Yeah, I'm not saying it.
Jason Witten. Yeah, Jason Witten got re-signed because he just
sure-handed tight end of all time.
Just eats touchdowns. He's fantastic. He's consistent. He's great. Terrence Williams is going to continue to eat up touches in the slot along with Cole Beasley. And then they signed Darren McFadden, who
another Raiders cast-off.
Broke his elbow catching his phone last season.
Because he was securing. For years we've been saying, Darren, secure. Well, he was securing on his phone.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. he ended up not really being needed because they the Alfred Morris, who they signed, who's still on the roster, ended up being a pretty good 1-2 punch as far as like a breather for Zeke. So I really don't know exactly what Darren McFadden's role is on this team, but I guess we'll see. I guess he'll be more of like the pass catching back if they need to breathe Zeke, because Alfred Morris definitely isn't that.
Let's be real. They lost Tony Romo. They need a designated IR player.
So
they kept Darren McFadden to fill that role.
Like I said, it's not super active during free agency. I feel like they were pretty. Granted, they're really hurting in terms of cap space, so that makes sense. They really had to let a lot of people go before they were able to do it. So the next season, I expect them to be a little bit more active as far as free agency goes. But they tried to address what they needed to address for a team that went 13-3 in the draft. First round, they went with. Who happens to have one of my favorite names recently?
The Cowboys draft, I like to, in my head, refer to as the Scrabble Bowl. Because they just threw letters together to see what points they could get with these names.
Taco Charlton, who is a defensive end out of Michigan, they haven't had anybody with more than double-digit sacks since, like, 2013. And that was a year or so before.
DeMarcus Ware?
DeMarcus Ware left. I think it was the year before DeMarcus Ware left. But yeah, they haven't had a good edge presence off of that, and that's really with their secondary playing how it played last year. Granted, like we talked about, they're going to have a lot of turnover, so we'll see how that goes going forward. In a division where you have Eli Manning and Kirk Cousins slinging the ball, and possibly Carson Wentz coming up and being a possibly good quarterback, and with what's happening here, that turnover in the secondary is not going to be good. But assuming that their secondary is going to be as good as it was last year, fingers crossed, or fucking whatever. The edge presence on their defense is what they needed to do. They needed to be able to put some pressure on the quarterback, and that's what I guess they hope to do here.
And let's face it, if there's a food that you could ever compare to edging, it's tacos, because they're so satisfying, but they never fully fill you up. Like they're enjoyable, but they just don't get you there.
Personally, I feel like it was a little bit of a reach because there were a lot of cornerbacks on the board here, but it was a fairly deep secondary draft, so they went with what they felt was a need versus what they felt that they need was more of a need given the depth in the position. Because the next two picks with their second and third round, they went with two cornerbacks. I'm not even going to try and say this dude's name, but I think it's Chidobe Awuzie, yeah, out of Colorado, and then Jordan Lewis out of
probably
Michigan
Great Britain or Canada, because he has that U in his name.
So we'll see how that goes. More than likely, one of them is going to be starting this season, so it's probably not going to be great. They turned over both of the safeties that they had, so we'll see.
Breaking news, I always like to point these out every year for me personally.
But rookie cornerbacks don't usually have a lot of success first year. Like that's not a place that you normally see. People have a lot of
it's never good.
Yeah.
It's rare for a rookie cornerback to do good. Their fourth round pick, I want to point out personally, because there's always one every year. North Carolina puts out a player every year. This year it's Ryan Switzer, wide receiver out of North Carolina.
Man, do I have some stuff for you then?
Man, your division did a lot. This is the player that'll probably actually be good out of.
You think so?
I think so.
All right. Well, I got a player for you that I think is going to be good.
Oh, that'll be
also
interesting.
out of North Carolina.
It's a personal joke for me. North Carolina, not a big football school. I'm a UNC fan. We always have a player that comes out usually off of the line. Never skills position players. That they got Ryan Switzer out of North Carolina, drafting sort of a project wide receiver with high upside. They kind of have. This wide receiver that people like to talk about that doesn't seem to make the big catches that are controversial. I don't know what his name is. Pez Wyatt or something. What's his name? What's that wide receiver?
I don't know. Throw up the Z.
They're addressing Des Bryant had minor energy issues. No energy issues. Minor injury issues over the years and aging. Great wide receiver, but going to be wanting to look to replace him slowly over time.
Not with Ryan Switzer, I don't think.
You never know. He's got the potential. But I just want to give the shout out to UNC on that one.
Next two picks, they went secondary again because the obvious area that they're gonna need help here is secondary. Xavier Woods, safety out of Louisiana Tech, Marquise White, quarterback out of Florida State, and then 3 7th-round picks, D tackle, wide receiver, D tackle. So I mean, just depth at that point. But I mean, you can tell that they were really targeting like, hey, we need secondary help here at this point. I mean, it might not look good this year, but if we draft well and hopefully get like a starter or 2 out of this, like this will be good in the near future.
Yeah,
that's definitely what they're expecting. I don't like. It's hard to say. I think the second round pick, the cornerback out of there, is going to end up being good, but I don't think he's going to be like a lockdown thing, especially with the competition that he played with out of Colorado. And I thought Tarkle Charlton, like I said, was a bit of a reach. But considering their needs and what they had at the time, I can't necessarily get on them for it. It's
28's a bad point to have to pick.
Yeah, the end of the first round
sucks.
The end of the first round just sucks in terms of drafting. Like you really got to either be the Patriots and draft back, or just like pick some random person that everybody's like.
That's how you get Teddy Bridgewatered.
Yeah, basically. So going into 2017, we've talked a little bit about their deficiencies. Their strengths obviously still are going to be their offensive line. Dak's going to have another year of chemistry with Dez. He's going to have another year of experience. Zeke is still fresh from what I assume. The only thing that might come from Zeke is that the NFL is still dragging its heels on this domestic violence thing that they're doing.
Yeah,
the court system and the police haven't levied any sort of punishment. They haven't arrested him. They've basically dismissed the case.
And then he's continued to do crazy shit in the offseason.
Yeah, so we still don't know exactly what's going to happen with it, if it's going to happen with it. Adam Schefter has reported that something will come of it. I don't know. If anything, they might suspend him for a few games. So, I mean, that might be it. So this might affect their record going forward.
Let's be realistic. This is Jerry Jones. They'll suspend him for 4 games, and it'll be preseason games.
Yeah, it's going to be some crazy shit like that. So, I mean, we'll go for that, with that forward. But their offense has only gotten better, technically, just via experience. They've lost really nobody on the line because all they're gonna do is they're gonna shift a couple people around, and it's gonna be just as good. So we'll see. It's gonna be the defensive end that they're gonna be really gonna be worried about. I personally, in my little draft thing or my little prediction thing, I had them going 9-7. So regressing quite a bit, but still having a winning record because I don't know. Maybe it's what I've seen them do, but it's one of those things where I'm not necessarily a Dak believer. I feel like he's more of a game manager type quarterback with like the playoff dragon Joe Flacco like in him. But I mean, he's proven to be better than quarterbacks that are starting now. So, and if you can pound that ball with Zeke, we'll see. Issue being is that this is a passing league. Your whole secondary was just turned over. You can't pound the rock with Zeke if you're down by more than 10 points.
Yeah, that's very true.
So their game plan is definitely going to have to be switched. They're probably going to have to sling the ball more with Dak. And if we're going to see him regress, it's probably going to be this season, not because he has to, or not because he's bad.
Their defense is going to take a step back, so they're going to have to change their offensive game plan.
Yeah, so you're gonna see his volume of passing throws just go way up. His passing throws, yeah. The volume of passes is just going to go.
Yeah, we're going to see if he's truly a Tom Brady or if he's a Matt Castle kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I had them, like I said, going 9-7, which is still good. I mean, from a 13-3 season going down to 9-7, it's definitely regression, but still a winning season. So
yeah. Same for me. I initially, my just quick picks, I had them 11-5. My thoughtful picks, I had them going 10-6. Not grossly far off from where you are. They still win the division. They are, sadly to say for you, they are still probably, the strongest team in the division. Their secondary took a major shit, though, in the offseason, and that can make or break it. Your division isn't, like, super high-flying offensively. I mean, you do have the Giants with Eli, ODB, like that combination. That's something that the Cowboys could really regret. And the Redskins, or the Washington football team, if you will, they have Kirk Cousins, who is like a slot machine. Like, he might be the future messiah of DC. or he may finally get exposed this year, but it won't be the Cowboys' defense that's exposing him.
I don't think so.
So, yeah, I mean, they're going to have a winning record unless something goes horribly wrong. Dak Prescott, dies in a horrible meteorite accident or something. I think that'll do it for the Cowboys.
Next up is the New York Football Giants, finishing second in the NFC East. Good for a 5th seed in the playoffs. They finished with 11-5 record, 7-1 at home, away 4-4. So just an average team.
Historically, that record won them the division.
11-5.
Yeah,
11-5 for most people is good enough for division win. The New York Giants and a lot of the whole storyline that came from them this season versus last season, where they were a middling team that got Tom Coughlin fired, was that they ended up winning a lot of the games that they didn't win last season, which is the same storyline that the Eagles had this year. Is that they lost somewhere in the range of 7 games last year by less than 8 points, and they just ended up winning those games this year. So they managed to crest over and get over that hump this last year. So we'll see. They didn't make a huge amount of adjustments like they made last year. Victor Cruz ended up leaving, but he didn't have that much of an impact coming back from those multiple injuries. They ended up getting better with Brandon Marshall coming over and basically replacing him. Rashad Jennings, who still is unsigned running back. Their running game is basically non-existent. They run a West Coast offense. They can't run the ball. Their offensive line is filled with turnstiles that can't get any push. They're basically pass blockers that can get Eli 2 to 3 seconds of breath before he has to get the ball out.
Is anybody calling their O-line Grand Central Station?
I don't know if they are, but if they aren't, you need to start doing it, because it's people run through there and take shits in the bathrooms.
Oh man,
there's no tomorrow. Jonathan Hankins, who ended up actually having a pretty big impact as far as getting push up the middle to allow players like Jason Pierre-Paul to get to the quarterback, ended up leaving, signing with the Colts. And then Robbie Gould, who they ended up replacing Josh Brown, does that sound right? Their kicker with?
Yeah.
Because of that domestic violence issue halfway through the season, ended up leaving and going to the 49ers.
Seems to be contagious in the NFC East.
And domestic violence?
Yeah.
Seems to be contagious across the NFL.
That's true, too.
Like I said, with the rivals, as far as that goes, they had Brandon Marshall come over from the other New York team, the Jets, because they're just cutting good players over there. They're over there trusting the process in Jersey. Geno Smith, another cast-off, came over because they ended up losing quite a bit in terms of quarterback depth. Eli Manning is currently the reigning Iron Man, though, so I don't think they're really worried about quarterback depth. He started every game.
2 or 3 years at least left in him.
Yeah. Apart from that, a couple defensive linemen, and Corbin Bryant and Devin Taylor, and then a cornerback who usually plays special teams in Valentino Blake. So not a lot of huge additions that weren't Brandon Marshall, because they didn't really need him.
And that was the thing. I didn't want to go too much into the Giants talking the Cowboys, but not only did they have Odell Beckham Jr., now they have Brandon Marshall too, and he is on the back end, but he's still fairly dependable. And let's face it,
it's an upgrade from Victor Cruz, and they still have Sterling Shepard.
Victor Cruz had 1 or 2 solid seasons. He was oh, this guy might be good. Then it was not really. But now they got Brandon Marshall, who had been Mr. Consistent ever since he got himself sorted out. He was great with the Bears in spite of Jay Cutler. And he wasn't awful with the Jets in spite of the Jets. So I'd hate to see what he can do with at least a semi-competent offense again.
Yeah, if anything, the issue that I see, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, is going to be their offensive line. I've already alluded to it a little bit, but it's going to be their offensive line.
It's a good thing that Eli's indestructible.
It's a really good thing. They re-signed John Jerry, who ended up coming on at the end of last season. He was fairly inconsistent, but he ended up shoring up that position as far as the left guard. So he ended up doing pretty good. They ended up paying him. They ended up paying Jason Pierre-Paul, which I didn't think they were going to do. I thought they were going to let him walk, which is interesting. They normally don't end up giving a lot of money to 7-fingered defensive linemen.
He's half of Inigo Montoya's worst nightmare.
But I mean, he's still a monster off the end. He still definitely gives me nightmares coming out of it. They re-signed Josh Johnson.
Josh Johnson's still in the league.
Yeah, and then linebacker Keenan Robinson they end up signing, who's good addition or good addition back to their depth. As far as the draft goes, they with their first round pick, which I thought was really interesting, they ended up going with Evan Ingram, who's a tight end out of Ole Miss, skipping on O.J. Howard, which I thought was really, really weird. He's not the most. He's basically Jordan Reed. And I mean, when I make that comparison, it's not a bad comparison. Jordan Reed's fantastic. He's scary. He basically makes that Redskins offense frightening because he can take up that whole middle of the field, and that's what they needed as far as like a threat from the offensive area because they're not going to be running the ball. That's basically they've decided that last season. They were like, we're going to try and run the ball, and then they started to do it, and they were like, this Rashad Jennings guy isn't great, and they have like 4 other running backs they just don't want to hand off to, so they can.
Let's be honest. They were like, we put a guy named OJ in Buffalo, and we got the Kardashians. We're damn sure not going to put one in New York.
So they went after Evan Ingram, who's, if he ends up being what they project him to be, and that's all the draft is that it ends up, if they can project how they think these people will project, he's going to be a monster. And they haven't had anybody be really scary in that tight end position since Jeremy Shockey in the early 2000s.
Oh, that's a lifetime ago.
Yeah, from the U.
Early 2000s Miami. God, Jesus.
They didn't end up going line at all. They ended up going line at the very end, but nothing as far as like things that aren't developmental picks. They ended up getting Dalvin Tomlinson out of the defensive tackle. Tomlinson. Dalvin Tomlinson.
Do not besmirch this. English is hard right now.
Besmirch?
Do not besmirch the name Tomlinson ever.
You're weird.
Mad respect.
Out of Alabama, they need some defensive tackle help. Steve Spagnuolo is really all about rotating in his tackles, which is why they ended up signing some pretty cheap tackles and ends in free agency. They just like to rotate them. So defensive tackle and defensive line depth is always something that Spagnuolo loves. David Webb, who they're thinking might be the guy to replace Eli Manning, but I highly doubt that. Like, developmental quarterbacks like that generally don't work, and Cal is one of those super systemized offenses to where I think it's going to be really difficult for him to transition over.
I was going to say, Cal quarterbacks, like, that's going to be super hit or miss. It's not like USC where it's like, this is a sure thing that will absolutely fail. Like, with Cal, it's like, flip a coin, maybe.
Yeah, so, I mean, David Webb is what they think is going to be the person, but, like, every time they draft a quarterback, and they being like any NFL team that has an established veteran, they drafted person in like the second or third round. They're like, he's obviously developmental because he wasn't the first or second round pick or the first or second pick overall.
This wasn't the year for quarterbacks. This was a bad year.
No, I mean definitely it wasn't a great year. We saw the Chiefs, who we'll talk about going on the next episode, just reach for a quarterback.
Yeah, thankfully.
So. It'll be interesting. I don't think David Webb is going to be the person coming out of it. Wayne Gallman, running back out of Clemson, they had some interest in LeGarrette Blount in the offseason. This ended up being
everybody did
what I'm seeing as like the replacement. He's a bruiser out of Clemson, but like I said, their offensive line doesn't have that push, and they haven't done anything to really change it. So unless these guys get their asses in gear and really try and push off that line, it's just they're not a running team. It's just so
I think they're really going with Eli's indestructible, and they got fast long receivers.
Yeah, so it's a West Coast offense, and they run by passing the ball. That's essentially what it is. So I don't see him getting a lot of use. Avery Moss, defensive end out of Youngstown State, like I said, Steve Spagnuolo just loves linemen, so they just want to rotate him in. And then Adam Bisnoite? Yeah, offensive tackle out of Pittsburgh, so developmental picks, like I said. 2017 predictions as far as like where we see them going. You want to go? Because I feel like I've tipped my hand a little bit.
My immediate gut reaction and my thoughtful reaction were both 5-11.
5-11.
5-11.
Interesting. That's way off where I had them. I have them as an 8-8 team because that's essentially where they were or not this year, but the year before, 2015. They were essentially an 8-8 team. They haven't really changed from that. Like I said, their offensive line is still an issue. They've gotten better on defense. Landon Collins, when we did our like end of the year player awards, was my defensive player of the year. He's fantastic. They've shored up that secondary, which is why I think they were allowed to have the season that they have. But given the amount of time that they're given, the weaknesses that I still see across their line and how dependent they are from a system standpoint on that line holding up, I just don't see them progressing the way they need to. I mean, Brandon Marshall and Sterling Shepard and ODB are all weapons. Evan Ingram could come out and have a monster season and could prove me wrong. They could end up going 11-5, 10-6 again. But I don't see it. I don't know. I just don't see it.
The reason I went that way, the gut reaction for it, is kind of with the trend I've been seeing and why some of my predictions are vastly different than yours is the passing game has been amplified with the rule changes, which for a team like them you'd think would be good. You know, Eli's, a very good quarterback. He's no slouch. They have solid wide receivers and potentially a good tight end that they reached for.
Mm-hmm.
The defensive side of the ball has really been more emphasized towards the line and less so in the secondary. And with them having such a weak offensive line and with everyone, looking for bigger, stronger, faster D linemen, that O-line could be what finally gets Eli killed. So I looked at their matchups and I thought about it, and I've seen the trend the past few years.
The NFC East has the AFC West this year, and they also have the NFC. They have the AFC and the NFC West this year.
Exactly, and both of those divisions have very ridiculous defensive lines. So Eli will be running for his life, hoping that his short quick passes get off successfully. But I looked at those matchups, and I kept seeing an AFC West with 4 unstoppable defensive lines, including
3
the Chargers.
unstoppable lines and the Chargers.
The Chargers with Joey Bosa, who turned out way better than we would have wanted him to.
Would have ever guessed.
Yeah.
Would have ever guessed.
God. But, they're facing a lot of really good D-lines. Their O-line is garbage. So I took some wins from them based on that fact alone. Now, I mean, if they can survive long enough for Eli to get off 2-second passes every single snap, because their running game's not going to do anything, then they might steal a couple more wins. But really, the defensive lines they face are ultimately what made that decision for me.
That's why I had them being 8-8. Essentially, is that they got better. They got better at what they were doing last year, which is what got them to 11-5. But I also don't think that, like I said, they won like 7 games by less than 8 points. Some things aren't going to fall their way, which means that they're going to fall back towards the middle more than likely, which is why I have them right around average 500.
It's one of those things that go either way. Next up, we have the Washington Redskins. We're going to do a 15-minute moment of silence
for Dan Snyder specifically.
I've been looking forward to this one. I think I was looking forward to this one more than the Raiders. Because
really?
The Washington Redskins are the new class of god-awful, and they have to compete with the likes of the 49ers, the Browns, the Jaguars, who are the most talented, terrible team of all time.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, explain to me why you think that they're going to be
be awful.
Because I, unlike many, fear Kirk Cousins.
Did you say Kurt?
I might have said Kurt, but regardless, I fear the man with the Cousins on the end of at the back of his jersey. He's scary.
That's going to play into a big part of it. It's going to be the incompetence of them. They were a team that went 8-7-1 last year. Just to give you an idea, teams that have ties don't tend to have winning records. Look it up. Most of the time, teams with ties are losing records. I don't know why it is. Huh?
They had a winning record last year. They went 8-7-1.
They didn't have a winning record. Because you have to have greater than 8 wins to have a winning record.
No, you're a fucker.
Ha! Technicality. They were 8-7-1 last year, 4-4 at home, 4-3-1 on the road. That's as mediocre as you can get without actually being 4-4. And having a tie in there, I feel like makes you more mediocre somehow. I don't know why.
Because you couldn't win. Like you literally
you got half a win. So congratulations on that. So I guess they were actually 8.5 and 6.5. I don't know. Math is hard.
You're 8 and you like 8-8 so hard that you weren't 8-8.
Yeah. They were third in the NFC East by some miracle for a dysfunctional team. They weren't in the playoffs, obviously. They lost their offensive coordinator, Sean McVay, who is now the head coach of the Rams.
Yes.
I think that's an important point. Because they've got this struggle going. Everything I think is going to be centered around Kirk Cousins for me.
You think so?
Yeah, because Kirk Cousins is one of those players to exemplify the dysfunction of the Redskins. They drafted 2 quarterbacks 4 years ago.
1 and 2, by the way. First round and second round.
Yeah.
Which, why?
Yeah, exactly. Robert Griffin III, who is drawing interest from teams right now, but ultimately his career died against the Seahawks, I think, with his knee.
God, that's...
It's what could have been. I personally, I said this last year, I projected him being better than Andrew Luck, and we'll never know now.
As an Eagles fan, granted, like we both have said probably disparaging things about players in our divisions. I don't wish any ill will from a player standpoint against Robert Griffin III. Like I want success for him, but that going down was like. Because you saw what he did with his rookie year, and I mean he lit it up, and it was just like shit. Like this is awful, but like this is good from an Eagles fan standpoint. But I don't wish any sort of ill will on him as a person or a player. So just to preface that, but yeah, like that, his career basically died when Shanahan put him in. Again, that was a bad decision.
And I never want to defend Mike Shanahan ever for so many obvious reasons. So many.
Raiders great.
But that was the end of his career. Like I want him to succeed. I really do. He could have been like Mike Vick light. Like he had the speed. He had so many things about him that were electrifying. He was fun to watch. That was it.
He was scary.
And they got Kirk Cousins, and then they were like, all right, we're going to keep him, and then we're going to franchise tag him, and then we're going to franchise tag him.
Again.
And for God's sake, they might franchise tag him next year. We don't even know how that's going to go.
Oh, my God. Do you know how much money he's going to get next year?
It would be $35 million approximately.
Yes. It's going to be crazy. Yeah. He will have made somewhere in the range of, $75 million?
It's an unreal amount of money.
Over the course of 3 years?
He's going to make almost as much as Towers Underground is going to make in the next 10 years.
Fingers crossed.
Hot takes. But it doesn't stop there with Sean McVay. They lost their defensive coordinator, Joe Barry, to the Rams.
Third coordinator for Joe Gruden. James Gruden?
Jay Gruden.
James Gruden.
Jay. God.
Jameson.
Jer Gruden.
Joseph Gruden.
Jonathan Gruden. Wait, that's the wrong Gruden.
It's the third coordinator. It's the third DC he's had in 4 years.
Also went to the Rams because if there's one thing the Rams have been longing for years, it's been dysfunction. So they're going to borrow from the Redskins as much as they possibly can.
No. They had Jeff Fisher. They know what the dysfunction is. They were on some 7-9 bullshit.
This is true. But it doesn't stop there. One of the most ridiculous off-season stories was their GM situation.
Yeah.
It was deplorable, arguably.
And they only really fixed that a month ago, or somewhere in the middle of June. They ended up promoting Doug Williams, and they still don't have a GM technically. He's like the senior vice president of player personnel, something like that. So he's like taking over both the scouting department and like player decisions from that. So he's going to be a catch-all. But he was in the area or in the department before. This is the first time he's going to be ever doing this. So we'll see.
So they fired their GM Scott, not McTom Coughlin, for being an alcoholic, allegedly.
Yeah, that's
just
as bad as cutting Deshaun Jackson for being a gang member.
We're not even there yet. That's relevant too. After he was fired, there was a picture leaked. I don't remember which player it was signing with the Redskins, but there was a bottle of liquor in the office, and one of the arguments was, how can you fire him for drinking when their team culture clearly encouraged alcohol in their office?
Oof.
So, I mean, that was very scandalous. It was basically decried by the entire NFL front offices, like across the league. Everyone thought it was horrible because he was actually really good at his job.
He'd been making good player personnel decisions. He'd been attracting free agents.
And he was a recovering alcoholic. So, the one thing about recovery from anything, and we've talked about this on our other podcast, Towers Underground podcast, but recovery sometimes has its backslides.
It has both backslides, and it's something that where, like, you take power over that kind of a thing. So maybe his way of, like, taking power of it would have been, like, it's one of those things where it's like, I have it ever present, but I don't know. And granted, I'm not somebody who's dealt with alcoholism or anything.
You set me up perfectly, because the real reason he was fired, my personal opinion, was Dan Snyder didn't like that Scott was taking power of the team by being successful and competent, something that Dan Snyder seems to not be excelling at.
Dan Snyder's doing his best goddamn Jerry Jones impression these days, and it makes me so happy.
So we'll move on from there. Just to round out the departures, they lost one of the most electric wide receiver tandems in the league in Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon.
Yeah, Deshaun Jackson, who is only second to Torrey Smith in yards per catch since like 2011, just eats yards, and he's not going to be that guy who catches in the middle, but I mean, he's that deep threat. Like, he's somebody that you have to account for, regardless of him, and they're gonna miss him. And Pierre Garçon is like he's the epitome of that third down receiver, that catch and run guy. So
that rounds out my why Kirk Cousins is going to have probably a regressing year this year. I'll let you tear through the rest of the Redskins. I just had to really make that point clear.
Oh no, but I've got a reason why Kirk Cousins may surprise us all.
All right, let's hear it.
You should know. Notable arrivals. They were promoted. Greg Minuski, who is their linebacker coach for a year. He's been a previous DC for a couple years. Most recently with the Colts. We all know how the Colts have been defensively for the last couple years, so we can assume it's going to be something similar. Matt Cavanaugh, who's promoted from their quarterback coach, is now going to be their OC. Never been an OC before, so we'll see how that is. I don't know exactly what they're going to be doing different from a scheme standpoint, but they lost basically their whole weapon catalog. So we're gonna see what happens. They ended up picking up Zach Brown from the Bills, who we talked a little bit about on the AFC East podcast. But I expect good things out of him, man. He 8 tackles last year. He's over 100 tackle person. They ended up really going and trying to shore up their linebacker position, because that's something that, since they still run a 3-4, I'm assuming that they're still going to run a 3-4. I haven't looked into it, but that's something that they're going to do. They need depth at the linebacker position for sure. And he's, like I said, going to just consume tackles. Brian Quick is, I'm assuming, their replacement for Pierre Garçon.
He's quick.
I mean, he's a possession receiver, I guess, but I mean, he's a cast off from the Rams, and he didn't really catch all that much in terms of like interest. So it just poor man's Pierre Garçon. Terrell McClain ended up going from Dallas to the Redskins for a pretty hefty contract. He'll eat up stuff in the middle. And Terrell Pryor.
Don't put that evil on me, Robert James Thackrey.
Terrell Pryor, who
Raiders great
was the only 1,000-yard receiver that the Browns have had in like 10 years. With the goddamn craziness, the QB carousel that they had in Cleveland.
They had, 4 or 5 starting quarterbacks last year?
Cody Kessler, Robert Griffin III, Luke McCown,
Johnny Manziel,
and you almost got me. They had quite a few, but yeah, still managed to have a good season by wide receiver standards in terms of yards. With that going on, imagine what he's going to have with some consistency coming from Kirk Cousins. And we've seen that he can do it. Like, I mean, he's put that team on his back.
I'm a believer.
The wins haven't necessarily come because they won the division last year at 9-7, and they finished at 8-7-1 this year. So I mean, his yardage totals, like his stats, haven't necessarily translated to wins for them because they give up just about as many points as they produce. But I still think, from a stat standpoint, Terrell Pryor is going to get his.
Yeah,
like he's gonna be like a 1,200 yard, eight touchdown.
Super long. He's super fast. He's unreal.
So
he should have been a wide receiver 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
I know.
Not on this world line. Not in this lifetime. Ended up shoring up some of the secondary problems they had with DJ Swearinger, who ended up coming from, I want to say the Texans, but I might not be. Yeah, I want to say the Texans.
It's Texans.
So yeah, I mean, Terrell Pryor may be the reason that the Redskins don't completely regress. Not specifically him on his own, but I mean, without Terrell Pryor signing there, it was easily going to be the Redskins being 5-11, if not worse. But
they made sure of it in the draft.
They ended up getting Jonathan Allen, who I thought, because of a pectoral injury, ended up sliding up the draft board. Also because there was a huge run on offensive players in the first 10 picks. They ended up getting a steal from there. Ryan Anderson, keeping with the Alabama trade, or the Alabama train, linebacker. Like I said, linebacker depth is something that they really wanted to improve in the offseason.
Especially since they kept Will Compton.
Yeah, didn't talk about that. Yeah, Will Compton is the one they re-signed. They also re-signed Vernon Davis, which is going to be interesting. He didn't end up producing for them, but because Jordan Reed has so many injuries, or has injury issues, Vernon Davis is a good depth pick.
Another thing they addressed in the draft too, interestingly.
Cornerback was their third round. Fabian Moreau out of UCLA. This was a very depth heavy draft as far as quarterbacks. So I mean, he was even being mentioned as far as taking a good depth pick in the second or third round. So he may be a good thing once they transition somebody, or transition one of their cornerbacks, once D'Angelo Hall ends up retiring, whenever the hell that's going to happen.
Never.
Samaj Perrin from Oklahoma, running back, just adding to the running back depth that they have. They ended up re-signing Chris Thompson. They had a couple other guys. I forget his name. Robert something, who ended up taking the lead at the end of the last season.
Don't look to me. I'm still pro moment of silence.
It's Robert. It's Robert B. I don't know what his name is, and I feel bad because
Baratheon?
I knew it was going to happen. Yeah, but he ended up taking it, so they're just looking for depth on that end. Safety in the fourth round, along with this running back. Tight end in the fifth round. Center in the sixth round, as well as a wide receiver, and then the safety linebacker hybrids that seem to be so popular in the seventh round, and then another cornerback. So mainly special teamers at the end of that round, more than likely. But yeah, you don't really see a trend. A lot of these teams had a trend as far as once you look at their overall drafts.
Yeah.
The only ones that really haven't had a trend that we've done have been the Giants, which really didn't have a lot of glaring issues that they needed to pick up, and then the Redskins, who ended up just kind of BPA, or the fact that apparently their GM was an alcoholic. He was just picking random players or some shit. I don't really know. But
I feel like this division, every team hit the ACC. I haven't confirmed it, but I think they all did. It's interesting.
So yeah, I think the steal that they ended up getting is Jonathan Allen. If he recovers from this pec injury, I think he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And Ryan Anderson, I think, is going to end up blossoming into a really good linebacker as well.
It could be problematic for the Cowboys and their weak O-line.
Yeah. Giants. You said the Cowboys.
Cowboys. This last segment, I think, is going to be 100% you.
We still have to talk about how you think they're going to be going forward. I think
moment of silence.
You said,
do you see the amount of? I'm not going to throw this much disrespect at any team outside of the AFC West. This is my chance.
I have them going 8-8 as well. Just because the last 2 seasons, like I said, they've been 9-7. They won the division when the division was down in 2015. 8-7-1, barring a tie, they would have been 8-8 last year. They've only gotten worse, as far as I'm seeing. They lost their OC, which Kirk Cousins ended up having a pretty good relationship with. They didn't do anything good or anything better to get better on the defensive end. I've only seen them getting worse, so at best they're going to be just as good as what they were these last couple of years, and that is 8-8.
I gave them 6-10 and then 5-11, only because, with all that disrespect, you're probably wondering why. Because it's the NFC East, I basically gave every team 4 wins, just to be safe. You all pretty much split the series across the division.
Yeah.
So that's realistically making them like a 1-win, 2-win team outside of the division.
Funny enough, I had them going 1-5 in the division.
Yeah.
Just to be fair, which is interesting.
That's just the kind of disrespect you only get from a division rival.
Their one win was against the Eagles in the division because that's what they do.
You're terrified of Kirk Cousins and the Redskins' dynasty of killing you.
Kirk Cousins is mean.
The bully.
But yeah, 8-8 average. Same thing with the Giants average. Maybe I'm hyping them up too much. Maybe you're going to be like the person that's actually going to be a little bit more, I guess, towards what they actually might be over the season. But I have respect for Kirk Cousins. I've seen him do crazy shit. Their average Giants, same thing. Eli doesn't have 2 Super Bowl rings for no reason. They're average at best.
David Tyree and
Mario Manningham.
There you go, Mario Manningham.
All right. So last but not least,
here it comes. Drum roll.
Philadelphia Eagles. Finished the season with a 7-9 record after starting 3-1. Just kind of hit a skid, which was to be expected with a first year coach and a first year quarterback, with basically no help across the board as far as offensive weapons. Like I said, 7-9, 6-2 at home. Away they were 1-7. So you really see where they dropped off. The defense in terms of points ended up giving up 10 more points away than they ended up taking or giving up at home. They ended average 15 points per game in terms of what they gave up. They ended average like 26 away. So I mean, if they could reach it and be 21 across the board, at least 3 more wins are heading their way.
At least they gave you a Christmas present at home.
Yeah, no, that was great. We talked about it a little bit, yeah, but it was a fantastic game against the Giants. 7-9. Since if you haven't guessed about the order that we're doing, this is good enough for 4th in the NFC East. Obviously, no playoffs. Hopeful this year. Notable departures: the burnt toast that was Leotis McKelvin.
His family's name is proud.
Borrowing from the great lineage that was Brandon Boykin, burnt toast the first.
Oh yes.
Really, I mean, we could anything that we have here will be better than Leotis McKelvin. Connor Barwin ended up getting cut, which I was super sad to see. He unfortunately doesn't fit in the 4-3 scheme that we're running. He really is great at that roaming defensive end linebacker hybrid. That seems to be really popular nowadays. That Terrell Suggs, Khalil Mack, Von Miller type player. And his cap hit was crazy. Like, we had to cut him, but he was really great in the community. Ended up giving a lot of money towards parks and really building up areas around the stadium, specifically in South Philly. So I was really really sad to see him go. Like he was the Eagles as far as like them on defense. Ended up cutting Dorial Green-Beckham because we actually have wide receivers this year.
I owe you an apology because I was the one last year saying, like, no, DGB's going to be good. Like, watch and see. He's going to bounce back after the Titans.
He's got all the talent in the world. He just doesn't... He's got, the Megatron... He's got the brains of a Megatron and the body of a
Reggie Nelson.
It's a joke I was going for, but yeah, the body of a Megatron with the brains of a Reggie Nelson. He just... For whatever reason, can't put the talent and the physical tool set that we have with what we're seeing on the field. Chase Daniel ended up living out his usefulness as far as like teaching Carson Wentz. Went back with the Saints because I guess he likes to sit on the bench. There. Yeah, likes to sit on the bench with Drew Brees.
Yeah.
Notable arrivals.
Here it comes.
Craziness. Like, absolute shock. Alshon Jeffrey on a 1-year deal, mind you. So we'll see how that ends up going. I'm personally pretty excited. He's a lot of the reason why I have them doing what they're going to do because he's going to provide that threat that they really need.
Biggest wins in the offseason.
As for a team, just objectively, I would say that it's a huge upgrade, especially because they had, like I said, no wide receiver help. Like, Jordan Matthews was exactly what the only... wide receiver that they had in terms of like production. First round pick last year with Nelson Aguilar was basically drop heaven. And we talked about DGB, it just not being present. And that's the top 3 wide receivers that we had. So I mean, that's anything was going to be an upgrade. And to get arguably the best wide receiver on the free agent market on a 1-year deal that is team friendly was crazy. And granted, he has had a couple down years. I mean, last year he didn't produce, and the year before that, injured. Does have some injury concerns, but he came out and said that he wanted to be in Philadelphia, which is super surprising. It's interesting that even with the year that Carson Wentz had, it being up and down, he said, "I want to play with Carson Wentz," which I was like, that's surprising. But anybody wants that player that wants to be in the team or with the team, so it's super surprising.
Yeah, and you also got another wide receiver. I'm going to coin a new nickname right here on Football Podcast.
Okay.
You all got wide receiver Torrey Smith. I'm going to nickname him henceforth the Banner Man. Because if you see flags, you will see Torrey Smith.
Yeah, he's good for 4 or 5 DPIs a year, on top of being the number 1 leader in yards per catch, beating only Deshaun Jackson.
That man won Joe Flacco's Super Bowl.
It got close. Like, he was a lot of the reason why they got there. So, excited to see what that is. That's going to be our deep threat, which we also didn't have. Completely retooled that wide receiving core. Matt Moxey came over from the Raiders
Penn State great.
To back up Carson Wentz, and Nick Foley and Dynamite also came back. Trying to recapture some of that gold.
So many good nicknames this year.
We also, surprise again, LeGarrette Blount ended up signing with us.
That was one, I was high on him last year.
I'm a little bit weary of LeGarrette Blount because, like I said, we talked about this on the AFC East podcast, but he goes to Pennsylvania and then sucks it up.
That's true. But you all do have a pretty good O-line.
I think our O-line is above average.
Yeah.
I think so. So we'll see, but I don't think he's going to produce like he did last year. 1,000 yards and 18 touchdowns isn't going to be anything near what we're going to see as far as him. We're lucky, I think 800 yards and like 6 to 8 touchdowns is probably going to be more likely.
Like a deceptively MVP season, according to me, last year.
Chris Long ended up getting him, which is going to end up shoring up some of the issues that we were having as far as like pressure that we weren't getting from Connor Barwin, so I think that's good. We'll see what we can get out of him. Patrick Robinson, good for depth. Chance Warmack from the Titans, who ended up being a disappointment, but he's from Alabama. His line coach from Alabama worked with him with the Titans. He ended up coming to Philadelphia, and that's part of the reason why we got him. Hopefully we can get what he was drafted at, or at least like the talent that we saw out of Alabama out of him. But at this point, he's purely depth, because our offensive line, barring injuries, of course, is, like I said, above average. I think it's going to be pretty good this year.
If you get Chance Warmack as depth for your O-line, you're not in a bad situation.
And then we ended up trading with the Ravens for Timmy Jernigan, who was good for like 4.5 sacks, and that he's only in the third year of his contract. So we're getting him super cheap. So hopefully he'll be able to give Fletcher Cox a breather and take up the person that we lost as far as like Benny Logan leaving. Notable re-signings, Wiz.
You Philadelphia people love your Wiz.
Guard center who ended up being real good in spot duty for us. I think he's going to compete for that left guard position with Alan Barber. We'll see. I like him. He's not great in pass protection, but he's a monster on the run game. Like, he knocks
smart.
people over.
The only reason he's not a Raider anymore is because he was expensive.
Yeah.
But he's absolutely an incredible O-lineman.
Personally, I thought they were going to move Jason Kelsey and have either Wiz or Isaac Simwalu. We went on some weird like Polynesian, Hawaiian, like Samoan thing last year with offensive linemen. So he's also a center that we drafted last year. So I assumed they were going to move Kelsey. Kelsey's still here. He's going to be here for at least this year. A little bit undersized, but he's great at pulling. So he's a great pulling center, and he's also pretty smart. So, I mean, Wiz has been signed on a 3-year team-friendly deal, basically as depth, too. So, I mean, we've got great line depth. Ended up extending Jason Peters out, so hopefully he'll end his career with us. He's got 2 more years, including this year. Najee Good, who's depth at this point, basically a special teamer. Trey Burton, who once Brent Selleck leaves, will probably be that blocking tight end. And then safety Jalen Watkins, who will probably compete for a starting job.
Yeah, I think you all know where your strength is on the team.
From a drafting standpoint, I personally wanted them to go corner heavy. They did, but they didn't go in the way that I expected them to go. Garyon Conley was one name that we were actually being specifically tied to, but because of the issues that came out like 2 to 3 days before the draft, as far as like possible sexual assault or like whatever happened, he ended up getting pushed up into like the 20s. 24, which ended up being good for one specific team. But because of that, they were able, and this is somebody that they said they were planning on targeting this whole time. But Derek Barnett, defensive end out of Tennessee. I mean, my words mixed up here. Who broke Reggie White's sack record. So, big things we hope.
At Tennessee.
Yeah.
All places.
So, big things we hope. A lot of the stuff that, or if there is a reason why he won't end up blossoming into something good, is because his arms are a little bit short, so he doesn't have a lot of that push-off that a lot of the good defensive ends have, as far as like pushing or being able to shed blocks.
Better spin.
And he works specifically off of ball snaps. So like a lot of the stuff is him getting off the ball and being quick off that. So if that doesn't translate, he might not end up being a good pick. So we'll see on that. Like, I'm high on him. He's got a lot of great measurables, but we won't know until he actually gets on the field. Round 2, they went Sidney Jones, who was being projected before his ACL injury as the top cornerback.
Yeah,
he was the guy.
He was one of those top 10 guys.
Yeah,
for sure.
Everybody was consensus on this as far as like that going. And then once he ended up going down, it was like a little bit murkier with like maybe Lattimore being the best one, maybe not. I'm glad we got him in the second round. That's a fucking steal. If he comes back and ends up being anywhere near where he was being projected, he will be our number 1 corner going forward, and it's not even going to be close.
No, it's not.
Ended up going with the corner Rasul Douglas, who is a ball hawk out of West Virginia. He's got a nose for the ball, even if he's a bit long. I think he's like 6'4", I want to say 6'3", so he's a bit big for a corner. And he has a bit of issues as far as like getting burnt down the field. He's great with stuff in front of him. Probably would be a great slot corner, but he doesn't have that top end speed. So I'm a little bit worried because he's probably going to be starting.
Yeah.
Mac Hollins, North Carolina, wide receiver.
I was waiting for this.
This was probably our special teams guy's pick, is because he's a great special teamer, and he only had 48 catches coming out of North Carolina, but 25 of them were 20-plus yards. So he gets down the field. So, we're going to have great downfield depth with Shelton Gibson, who they picked in the 5th round, and Mac Hollins and Torrey Smith. So I expect them to be pushing the ball down the field a lot more this year, because they did not push the ball down the field at all last year. And that was
It'll be interesting to see if they get him in a rotation.
It'll be interesting, because I think we still have Jordan Matthews, we still have Nelson Aguilar, who they're still trying to do something with. It'd be a detriment to cut him at this point because of cap regulations. So we'll see. Donnell Pumphrey, they ended up getting between Shelton Gibson and Mac Hollins in the 4th round, supposedly being viewed or hailed as the replacement for Darren Sproles, because he's only going to be in here like that. That's the exact face that I got. But
this is not a visual medium, but I made a face.
It's the face of disbelief. I'm excited to see what they do with him, though. I mean, a shifty guy out of a smaller school. We'll see. They have a pony set, which they're calling, which is basically those two in the backfield. And guarding those two is going to be very difficult, because, at this point, what do you do? Do you put a safety on Darren Sproles? Do you put a linebacker on Pumphrey? Do you put a linebacker on Sproles? It's a bad idea. So,
dime packages.
I think they're going to cause, depending on how much of the offense he's able to absorb, it's going to cause some issues going forward. Nathan Gary, who was a lot, I listed here as a linebacker. He played safety at Nebraska. They wanted him to beef up. They ended up having him put about 20 pounds on.
May end up in that hybrid role, probably.
That's exactly what they want him to do. They want him to put on some more weight, and then, because he hits hard. He played close to the line. He hits hard, and he just doesn't really have a nose for, coverage wise. So he's basically a linebacker that played safety at Nebraska.
I was gonna say, it's been a while since you drafted a terrifying safety.
I don't think he's going to be terrifying, but I mean, if he can hit half as hard as Brian Dawkins, then I'll be happy.
Just put a visor on him; it adds plus 10 strength.
Elijah Quayles was a depth pick out of Washington, because you know how Jim Schwartz is. He loves to rotate those D tackles.
Jim Schwartz.
Yeah. So overall, I think it was a pretty good draft. They didn't necessarily do exactly what I thought they were going to do. Specifically, and they said it. They didn't say it is what caused it, but I do think that they had to switch their plan because of Garyon Conley, because that's just not something that the Eagles go with. They don't high character players, quote unquote, is something that they go with. They don't really take risks as far as players like that. So
he's rapist. He's not my kind of rapist, but he's rapist.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Sidney Jones recently was taken and put on the active list. He's still not recovering, but they say he may play this season. He's the one I'm most excited for, truthfully, because that's a steal. That, I think, personally, might be one of the best picks in the draft. As far as 2016 predictions, call me a homer, but I had them going 10-6.
I mean,
I have them going 10-6 and winning the division.
It's not.
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but I've been thinking about it and I've been talking about it, and the Giants might take it. Things may go their way again. 11-5 definitely isn't out of the realm of possibility for them, and for all we know, that secondary for the Cowboys may go exactly how it went last year, and they may run the shit out of that ball, and they may be 13-3 again. So I mean, this is all very suspect, but the games that I had them winning, I think that they match up well. I think they match up better than the Giants and the Cowboys, and especially the Redskins with the teams that they're playing this year, being the NFC and the AFC West.
I'm going to validate you. It's a rare thing I'm going to do, but I'm going to validate you. Of course, I've said multiple times, I did my initial very quick gut picks, and then I gave thought to it and repicked. Out of every team, the biggest swing in wins versus losses was, in fact, the Eagles.
Yeah.
I initially had the Eagles at 6-10, just on my gut.
It's totally something that could be possible.
When I sat and thought about it, I did give them 9-7. That's a 3-win swing after giving thought to it, because I looked at the free agency, I looked at the draft, and I looked at the division, and they picked up a lot of talent. That division is so weird, and the Cowboys, it's one of those things where, like, the Cowboys are kind of like the Saints of the NFC East, where, like, they could really have this just ridiculous offense if they try, and their defense will be dog shit this year. The Eagles covered one of their biggest weaknesses by addressing the wide receiver position. They made sure they maintained depth at their O-line, which, as I've said, is something that is very important, and their D-line is promising.
The only thing that's suspect is the secondary.
And the secondary again, the secondary has been diminished so much with rule changes the past few years, which is why I'm thinking we're going to see the decline of the Seahawks, which we'll discuss the week after next, I believe.
A couple episodes from now, at least.
It'll be a couple episodes. But your secondary sucked, and that's all fine and good. But
it can't get worse. Like that's when I really look at it. I was like, these last 2 seasons, like we've trotted out. We haven't had 2 pairs of starting quarterbacks in 3 years that have been the same.
I'm not sure you've had 2 cornerbacks.
I haven't seen them. I was in Philadelphia, and I could have played corner better.
Leotis, goddamn McKelvin, for fuck's sake.
We had people like Byron Maxwell, Nolan Carroll, Brandon Boykin, and Leotis McKelvin starting.
Why do all these people have some kind of crazy, like, freaking Celtic names? What is with your team?
Well, yeah, I mean, it can't get worse. Like, I forget this dude's name, but I'm gonna feel really bad. He's got green hair because he's really odd, but he's going into his second year. He's actually going into his third year this year. He had a terrible game against Megatron in 2015, where they just got absolutely burnt. That Thanksgiving game, he just got destroyed. So I mean, he's one of those guys where he gets up and he just waves that finger at people. I mean, he's not the fastest guy out there, but he's got guts. So I think he's going to end up developing into a good number 2. And if Sidney Jones ends up being what he needs to be, he can be that number 1, and then we'll be scary as far as that secondary goes, because we still have Malcolm Jenkins out there.
Do you think that the fact that you have an offensive player with red hair and a defensive player with green hair is why you keep getting Christmas games?
It's possible. But yeah,
I promise you, no one has thought of that until now.
All of this is just, like I said, where it's just projections. We'll see. For all we know, the offense could not gel at all. Alshon Jeffrey could be a fucking bust. Carson Wentz could regress. We could get no push on the offensive line and then be 4-12. So, I don't...
If the Cowboys die, I think it's your division this year.
I'm more frightened of the Giants than I am the Cowboys. And because of that, we match up better with the Giants than we do the Cowboys. So I think that we can take the Giants.
Especially at home.
Yeah. Like, just
Giants are not welcome at the Link.
Just from a position standpoint, Eli's good to give us a game. Like, Eli's going to give us a game a year. And just from a position standpoint, like, we match up so much better with them than they do with the Cowboys. And if the Cowboys, I think, are going to regress as much as as I think they are, and with our additions to our wide receiving core, I think we can take them. I really do. And I don't have us winning like a mass amount of games. We're the 4 seed as far as my projections go, so we just barely make it in. We're the worst of the divisions, but 10-6.
I give you the 3 and then the 2 in the division.
What do you mean?
In the division.
No, I'm saying we win the division, but as far as like playoff seeding goes, I have us being the 4 seed. So like, we're the worst.
Yourselves a playoff. Oh, that's right.
I have us winning the division
because you were being a homer.
Yeah. So
no, but seriously, no, I can definitely see it. Like I say, my thoughtful pick was 1 win off from you. The difference of you winning the division and not winning, essentially.
Yeah, because
you flip a win with the Cowboys in my predictions, and you win the division.
That's what it came down to when I was doing the picks, is that we have the Cowboys at the end of the season at Philadelphia, and I was like, at Philadelphia for the division, for the playoffs. I was like, I think that the Eagles would put it out. That's just how it is. But I'm also an Eagles fan, so fuck me.
I'm going easy on you because next week we're doing the AFC West. Or rather, next episode, rather.
So yeah, that'll be it. Hopefully these predictions stand tall. I'm sorry out there if you're a Redskins fan, because we went kind of... Brandon's not sorry if you're a Redskins fan, but I still fear you.
There's no greater disgrace than Terrell Pryor going to the Redskins unless he had gone to the Broncos, Chiefs, or Chargers.
So, thanks for listening, guys. Like we said, next week we're going to be doing the AFC West. So if you are a Chargers, Chiefs, Broncos, or
no one's greater than the Raiders.
Raiders fan, tune in. I'm sure it'll be just as fun as this episode.
Thanks for listening, guys. Night.